We're in week 8 or 9 of Hidden Dragons. It's that point in the series that we've done so many of them you can't remember where we're at. And we've only got one more left after today. And so this is the last dragon we'll talk about. And then next week we'll talk about how to help someone you love. The dragon today is resentment. And we're going to talk about 3 people that are going to help us learn about resentment. Abraham Wald, John Gottman, and King David. So I'm guessing you've only heard of one of those. The guy that I was having trouble remembering, King David, is probably the only one you've heard of. And yeah, the King David that is talked about in 1st and 2nd Samuel and written most of the Psalms, that guy. You may have heard of John Gottman. If you're a big Malcolm Gladwell fan, it's possible you've heard of John Gottman. You probably haven't heard of Abraham Wald. So we'll start with him. That's Abraham Wald, a very famous mathematician, as famous as mathematicians get. That's why we haven't heard of him. But he was a very famous mathematician in the 40s and 50s. He was part of a group called the Statistical Research Group that the Navy tasked with doing an analysis on planes that were coming home from war, because we were losing a lot of planes to anti-aircraft fire. And so the Navy was trying to figure out where to armor the planes. And they knew that planes needed additional armor. They couldn't armor the whole plane because it would make it too heavy, so they needed to be very strategic about where they put the additional armor. So they tasked the Statistical Research Group with coming up with a solution to this, and they began to analyze planes that were coming home from war. And this is a sample of the diagram that they came up with, and those red dots represent the bullet holes where planes were receiving damage. And so the conclusion was fairly obvious. Planes are getting hit mostly in the wings and the fuselage and the tail. So if we want to get more planes home from the war, we need to armor those areas. So we need additional armor in the fuselage and the wings, and we'll have more planes survive. Abraham Wald disagreed. And Wald said, actually, you're missing something. If you want more planes to return home, you need to armor the areas where there are no bullet holes. And the reason he said that, I mean, it sounds crazy. When you look at that diagram, it's like, why would you armor the front area? Why would you armor that? I mean, that sounds nuts, because there's the analysis of exactly what's happening there. But Wald saw something that was hiding in plain sight that most couldn't see. It was almost like it's so obvious you can't see it. This is what it was. They were only analyzing planes that had returned home from war. So they were analyzing damaged planes. There were obviously planes that were getting hit in the engine area, but those planes were crashing and not returning. So the Navy thought they were analyzing where planes were suffering the most damages. What they were actually analyzing was where planes could suffer the most damage without receiving a catastrophic failure. So a plane could receive bullet holes in the wings and in the tails and the fuselage and still return home. So what Wald said was, you guys need to armor the engine, because that is the area, if a plane is hit in the engine, it will not return home. They were only analyzing the survivors. Now, that's fascinating. Okay, and you can look that up and Google it, and because that's a fascinating story. But what in the world does it have to do with resentment? For that answer, we got to go to this guy, Dr. John Gottman. Now, Dr. John Gottman became relatively famous in 2007. And you may have known about his work before then, but 2007, Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Blink, and chapter 1 was about Gottman and his research. Gottman is a researcher at the University of Washington, and since the 1980s, he has been researching marriages to determine which ones survive and which ones fail. So Wald basically was trying to research planes and determine which ones survive. He's doing the same thing, only he's researching relationships, which is obviously a little bit harder to determine. But what Gottman did was, about 3,000 couples have gone through his research lab. They call it the Love Lab. And what he does is he invites a couple to come in. They hook them up to some sensors that kind of measure blood pressure and heart rate and all that kind of stuff. And they put a camera on each one. So there's a camera on the wife and a camera on the husband. And there's a researcher. And I couldn't tell if there was one researcher or two. There may be one assigned to each one. And they're kind of recording how they respond. And Gottman just invites them to have an argument. He says, this is all I need you to do. Just pick an issue. And a couple can choose their own issue, apparently. Just pick an issue about what you've been fussing about lately and discuss it. And we're going to record this, and we're going to have a researcher recording, and we're going to be measuring kind of how you react to one another. In only an hour of that, Gottman can predict with a 95% accuracy which couples will stay together and which couples will split. If he only views 15 minutes of video, this is what Gladwell says, because this is what Gladwell was so amazed by. If he only views 15 minutes of video, he can still predict within 90% accuracy whether a couple will split or stay together. Now, how in the world does Gottman do that? Especially when people don't really argue in the Love Lab. They don't really. Think about this. We've all had arguments with our spouse, right? If an argument with your spouse that's being recorded is obviously going to look a little different than an argument in private, right? And an argument with another person in the room who's recording your actions is going to look a little different. And that's what Gladwell says in the book. He says most of these couples don't fight. He went and watched one, Bill and Sue, and they talked about a dog. And he said, they're disagreeing over the dog. And Sue says, you don't like my dog. And Bill says, yeah, I don't like your dog. And they just had a 1-hour discussion. No yelling, no cursing, no finger pointing, no photo. There's nothing. Like he looks at it and goes, they're fine. And Gottman says, ooh, they got problems. Now, how could Gottman do that? It's because, like Wald, Gottman saw something that's hiding in plain sight. And what we're going to talk about today usually hides in plain sight. Because what Gottman did was he was not looking about, he didn't care what they said to each other. He cared how they said it to each other. So it wasn't the words they were using that he's looking for. What Gottman was looking for was the feelings that are felt that are underneath the words. And the feelings don't always match the words. Or, they can say something, you can have they can agree, they can say, yes, dear, but it's with clenched teeth, or it's with a rolling of the eyes, or, they tense up when they say it. And they're saying something nice, but they're not feeling something nice towards the other person. So Gottman was looking for what are the emotions that are felt underneath the surface. And the reason that that's so tricky is that we are really adept at hiding those emotions. The longer we've been married, probably the better we are at hiding those emotions, even from our spouse. But we're really adept at hiding it from other people, right? And so how do you deal with that? And what is that emotion? Here's the thing that Gottman said. He said there's 4 emotions. He called them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. But he said there's one that's fatal. If one emotion shows up, if I watch an hour-long conversation and I see this one emotion, then I'm almost certain that marriage will not survive. And it's this: contempt. He said if there is contempt in a relationship, if there's contempt expressed in the way they talk to one another or the way they interact with each other, I'm fairly sure that the relationship can't overcome that or will have trouble overcoming that. Now, here's what's interesting to me. How many couples do you know who have divorced because of contempt? None. Right? Have you ever had those of you had a friend go through a divorce, or maybe you've been through a divorce or something like that, you never said, well, what happened in the marriage? Well, I had so much contempt for her that I couldn't stay married to her. Nobody says that. Nobody admits that, right? Nobody talks about contempt was the problem. Contempt was the thing that led to our downfall of our relationship. What do we call it? Irreconcilable differences in legal terms. That's what we call it. In layman's terms, we say, we were just fighting all the time. Or we just grew apart. It wasn't that we were fighting. We weren't fighting. We were getting along fine, but we just grew apart. We kind of lost some of that feeling. We fell out of love. People say that. I hear this all the time about marriage. What happened to the marriage? Well, we fell out of love. Well, what does that look like? Most of the time it looks like this. Because it's hard to love someone for whom you feel contempt. Because here's what contempt is. And it's cousin's resentment. Let me throw that up real quick. So we're talking about both of these things. Contempt and resentment are real closely related. But here's what it is. According to the definition, both of them are described as feelings of bitterness, indignation, disgust, or intense displeasure for another person. The difference is contempt is when we feel superior to that other person. So we look down on them with bitterness and disgust. Resentment is when we feel inferior to that other person. So we kind of look up to them with bitterness and disgust. But either way, the bitterness is there. And these feelings don't just affect our marriages. These feelings affect parent-child relationships. They affect relationships between friends. They affect relationships between coworkers. Any kind of relationship in our life can wrestle with feelings of contempt or resentment. And other signs of it include treating one another with disrespect, mocking with sarcasm, hostile humor, dismissal of feelings, name-calling, mimicking, sneering, cold shoulders, not speaking, long-haired grudges. Don't start elbowing each other, okay? It's just leave that alone. I saw y'all kind of like starting to do that. You know, the point is this. It could happen in any relationship. No relationship is immune from contempt or resentment. It usually starts as resentment and builds into contempt. But no relationship is immune. And we're really good at hiding it from one another because that's what we've been trained to do with these feelings. Here's the other thing that's really tricky about this emotion. It's usually not triggered by a single event. It can be, for sure. You can have somebody wrong you, some injustice, something happens to you, there's something really bad that happens, and that produces feelings of resentment. But what usually happens is it's a culmination of smaller things that just keep building on each other. Particular insults or injustices or slights or whatever, and they can be perceived or they can be real. That's the other tricky thing. I mean, it can be a perceived. You can believe that somebody wronged you and they didn't mean to wrong you, or that was not intentional, but you just interpreted it in the wrong way. But resentment is something, it usually doesn't boil over. It usually just simmers. And it just kind of builds. You know, just they do one little thing and that bothers you and you don't say anything, and then they do another and that bothers you, and then they keep doing that one little thing. And why do they keep doing that? They know it bothers me. Well, no, they don't. You hadn't said anything about it, and it just kind of starts building. And so it usually doesn't result, sometimes resentment comes as lashing out and anger and that kind of stuff, but it usually comes more as withdrawal and just kind of pulling away from each other and kind of pulling away from the relationship, kind of growing distant. So the question is, what do you do about that? I mean, how do we deal with that emotion? How do we cope with that? Well, we name it. I mean, we got to be honest about it and say, this is kind of what I'm feeling, and that's really hard to do with these. Just like envy, it's really hard to say, man, this is what I'm feeling. But what do we do with that? How do we deal with our feelings of resentment? How do we shrink that dragon? Okay, that's where this guy comes in. So now we got to talk about King David. And that's the best picture I got of King David. He didn't take many pictures, but Michelangelo says that's what he looked like. So that's what he looked like. And I just did the headshot because Michelangelo didn't put any clothes on him. So Psalm 37. Psalm 37 is what David wrote, and it is a psalm of resentment. And this is interesting to me. He never mentions resentment in the psalm, but neither do we. When we talk about our relationships, we don't talk resentment. He never mentions contempt in the psalm, but it's about it. We don't talk about it either. And if you're wondering why my Bible's purple this morning, I'll explain. Okay, when I was wrestling with this topic, I guess what I could say, I was studying, but I was also wrestling with the topic. I was at home on Thursday and I was writing and I needed a Bible. I forgot my Bible. It's sitting right there from last Sunday. And I could look it up online, but I like to have an actual Bible laying there as I'm writing. And so I asked Callie if she had one, and she said, there's probably one in my room. So I went up in her room and looked, and this is what I found. And it's probably one from when she was 8 or 9 or something, but it's the Children's Adventure Bible. And so I picked up this Bible and started reading Psalm 37, and I really liked it. And you want to know why? Because it hit me as I'm reading the Children's Bible. You know who doesn't wrestle with contempt and resentment? Children. Think about it. It's a learned behavior, right? I mean, there's not many 4-year-olds going around going, I'm just really wrestling with resentment today. I just got a real resentment problem, right? I mean, they get over stuff pretty quick, right? Kids get over it pretty quick. There's kind of a bell curve when it comes to resentment. When we're really young, we don't wrestle with it as much. And I think sometimes as we age, we begin to mellow just a little bit. You've experienced this in your life or heard this. It doesn't happen for everybody, okay? But sometimes as we get older, things that used to bother us when we were younger, we think, you know what? That was really not that big a deal. I don't know why I made such a big deal out about that. I don't know why I ended the friendship over that. That was stupid of me. We start to mellow a little bit. And Psalm 37 is written when David's an old man. So here's a psalm from an old man written in a children's Bible. And here's what he has to say. Don't be upset because of sinful people. Don't be jealous of those who do wrong. Like grass, they'll soon dry up. Like green plants, they'll soon die. Trust the Lord and do good. Then you'll live in the land and enjoy its food. Find your delight in the Lord. Then He'll give you everything your heart really wants. Commit your life to the Lord. And here's what He'll do. So what David talks about immediately, he's talking about, don't be resentful of people. Don't be envious of people. Don't be upset about, whatever's going on. Don't be bitter about these things. But he tells them, trust the Lord, find your delight in the Lord, commit your life to the Lord. What if the source of our resentment was not about the actions of the other person, but it was about our lack of trust in God? Because what we feel like is we have to be the vindicator. We have to be, resentment starts with the other person, but it quickly becomes about us. Like that, I will not let them wrong me in that way. I will get back at them. I will not let them talk to me that way. I will not let them insult me in that way. I will be the one that resolve. We become the vindicator, the avenger, whatever you want to call there. And what David is saying is, you got to trust God. Trust God, find your delight in God, commit your life to God, and here's what He'll do if you trust Him. He will make your godly ways shine like the dawn. He will make your honest life shine like the sun at noon. So this is the verse I really liked, verses 7 and 8. Be still. Be patient. Wait for the Lord to act. Don't be upset when other people succeed. Don't be upset when they carry out their evil plans. Resentment actually can come in response to somebody doing nothing to us. It can come just because we're jealous of their success. We're jealous of their happiness. I mean, we can feel resentment because of their success. He says, don't do that. We can feel resentment because they've carried out some evil against us or they've done some wrong against us. And he says, don't do that. Just be still. Just be patient. Wait on God to act. This is not for you to fix. What if the way we handled our resentment was just say, I'm going to trust God to actually be the judge. I'm going to stop trying to be the judge, jury, and executioner of this, and I'm just going to trust God to be the judge. It's God, you be the person who handles this. This is in your hands. This is not in my hands. In the New Testament, it says, don't overcome evil with more evil. It says, overcome evil with good. So if your enemy's hungry, give him something to eat. If your enemy's thirsty, give him something to drink. Do not seek revenge. That's the Lord's. Revenge doesn't belong to us. It belongs to God. Jesus said, turn the other cheek. If your enemy asks you to go 1 mile, go 2 miles with them. If they ask you for your coat, give them the shirt off your back. I mean, that's very difficult teachings, but that's exactly kind of what David's echoing there. I guess Jesus is echoing David if we put it in the right order here. But I mean, that's it. Just be still and be patient and trust in God. And then verse 8 says, keep from being angry. Turn away from anger. Don't be upset. It only leads to evil. Now, here's the way that the Children's Bible puts it in Ephesians 4, because that's what this psalm led me to next. Ephesians 4, verses 30 and 32. Look at this. Do not make God's Holy Spirit sad. And the NIV says, don't grieve the Holy Spirit. And grieve the Holy Spirit, it's saying the same thing, but there's something about it, the way they write that, don't make God sad. Well, what would make God sad? He marked you with a seal for the day when God will set you completely free. So get rid of all hard feelings and anger and rage and stop all the fighting and the lying and put away every form of hatred and be kind and tender to one another. Forgive each other just as God forgave you because of what Christ has done. So the antidote to contempt and resentment are these two feelings right here. Compassion and forgiveness. Because that's what he says in Ephesians 4. He says, this get rid of all the bitterness, Get rid of all the rage. Get rid of all the anger. Get rid of the forms of malice and hatred. And just be kind and tender to one another. Be kind and compassionate to one another. And then forgive. And forgive doesn't mean in all cases saying, it doesn't mean saying their behavior was right. If somebody wronged you in a very serious way and you've chosen to forgive them, it doesn't mean that you are now condoning their behavior. It means that you are choosing to let go of the hurt caused by their behavior. You're choosing to let go of the bitterness caused by their behavior. And sometimes the bitterness is a result of what they've done to you rather than what you've done. And so you're choosing to let go of that. And let me tell you, that's hard to do. When you're wrestling with feelings of contempt and resentment, how do you forgive someone for whom you feel contempt? Those things don't go together. How do you show compassion towards someone that you resent? You see why it's hard. The only way you can do that, in my opinion, is to trust in God. Because then God's Holy Spirit allows you to do that. It gives you the strength to do what is very, very hard to do. You have to trust in God. But even that in itself is trusting. Trusting is hard. That's hard. So how do we do it? Well, let me tell you what happened to me this week. Because I saw an example of it this week in the unlikeliest of places. And I didn't even realize I'd seen the example until probably Friday of this week, and it just hit me that it's exactly, what we're talking about in regards to trust. Last Saturday night, you guys remember there were several storms that went through last Saturday night, and we had some really, really bad rain. And my dog freaks out about storms. So she's an anxious dog anyway, but she really freaks out about storms. Even rain makes her a little on edge, okay? And so she never comes in the house, but on Saturday it was storming and raining and all that, and so every time we'd open the door, she'd come running in the house, and we'd have to chase her out and all that. And, she could run upstairs and hide under Hallie's bed. I had to go get her and pull her back out. And we decided to go eat Saturday night, and we decided to go eat right in the middle of the storm. We're like, hey, let's go eat. And it's pouring rain. Come on, let's leave. And so we all ran out to the car, and I opened the truck door, and everybody's jumping in, and the dog jumps in the truck. Hey, she's soaking wet. She's running all over front seat, back seat. Jenny's in the car. Jenny hates dogs. It's like, get the dog out. So I kicked the dog out. We shut all the doors like, come on, we got to get out of here. And I pull it in reverse, and I back out, and I went right over her. She's alive, okay? She's alive, but I went right over her. And, of course, I jump out of the truck, and we reacted the same way you guys reacted. Like, we jump out of the truck, and she's yipping and running around. I try to grab her, and she bites at me, and she runs in the garage, and I go in. I just leave her in the garage. I go in there and Google the emergency vet, and we call them, and they said, yeah, bring her on right now. And we go out and wrap her up in a blanket and get her to the vet. And so by the time we get her to the vet, I'd picked her up and put her in the back seat of the car. When I opened the door to go to the vet, she jumped out in the parking lot at Neely's Mill. She jumped out. So she's better than I thought she was going to be. And I catch her, put the leash on her and all. We get her into the vet's office, and she's walking on it. I mean, she's beat up pretty bad. It's pretty catastrophic accident, but she's walking on it. She's putting weight, and so the vet said if she's putting weight on it, then it's probably a good chance she didn't break anything. I mean, you got really lucky that she didn't break anything, but she's going to be really, really sore for a few days. So I'm going to sedate her. We're going to clean her up, kind of stitch her up and all that stuff, and then she just needs lots of bed rest. And so we took her home. My sister brought over a bed for her because she doesn't actually have a bed because she chews up all of them. And so my sister brought a bed over and said, you owe me if she chews it up. And so I put it in the garage, and I tried to get her to lay down on it, and she wouldn't lay down on it. And I thought, well, she's a dog. She'll lay down when she's ready. And so we went back in the house and kind of just waited. And I'd locked her up in the garage that night, and every time I went to check on her, she was standing up. And this went on for several hours. And so finally it's getting late in the night, and I go out in the garage and I just sit there to look at her, and she's standing, but she's not going anywhere. She's just standing completely still, head down. And I noticed that she's falling asleep while she stands. Like she won't sit down because it hurts, because that's where she was hit, was in the hips, and so she won't sit down, but she's going to sleep. She's just standing there, and she'll kind of start, swaying, about to fall, and then she'll stumble and then wake back up a little bit. And I'm like, I got to get her to lay down somehow. Somehow I got to get her to lay down. And so I led her over to the bed, and, I'm just kind of petting her and coaxing her and trying to talk her into laying down. Of course, I can't explain, you really need to lay down. That's the best thing for you. But I try my hardest, and I reach back, and she doesn't like that, and I'll kind of push back a little bit. She doesn't like that. And so what I finally did was I got her to put her front paws on the ground, on the bed, and then she laid her head down on the bed. And so you can visualize this. She has her front paws down, her head's down, and her butt's in the air. She's still standing because it hurts too much to lay down. And this was probably, and all I can do is coax her. So all I can do is just like, baby, you got to lay down. You got to lay down. You just trust me. You got to lay down. You got to lay down. You're going to feel so much better once you lay down. You're going to feel so. And so this took probably 20, 25 minutes of just trying. Oh, please lay down. Please lay down. Please lay down. And eventually she just got so tired that she sat down. She laid there for 15, 16 hours. Didn't get up once she laid down. She stayed in the exact same spot. And so the next day, I had to get her up because you can't lay there, she has to go to the bathroom and those stuff. So the next day, I helped her get up. And that was hard, and she was yelping and all when she got up. And so what I've been doing since Saturday is I've been laying her down and getting her up because she can't do it by herself. So I have to help her do that. And she just Thursday, she started doing it on her own. So she's getting better. And the vets rechecked her and things are looking good. But I've been helping her lay down and get up. Now here's what I discovered while doing that. By about Tuesday or Wednesday, she had it figured out. And what she had figured out was that what I was trying to get her to do was good for her. And so then I could just take her over to the bed, take her front paws and lay them down, and she would immediately sit down. Because she learned to do what? She learned to trust me. Because I was trying to get her to do something that hurt. And she finally learned to trust me. Those two things up there, if you're feeling resentment or contempt towards a person and God's telling you to forgive, it hurts. But if we could trust Him, He's trying to get us to do something that's going to bring relief. Yeah, the act of doing it hurts. Yeah, it may take a while to get there. Yeah, it may take a while to get comfortable enough that we can actually follow through with it. The act of doing it hurts, but if we could just learn to trust God, He's trying to get us to do something that will bring relief. It will bring rest. Be still. Be patient. Wait on God to act. It's just getting to the trust part is the hardest part of the whole thing. Let's pray together. Father, I'm mindful as I talk about this topic that the room, there's so many different people in this room in so many different situations. And I know that I'm talking about resentment that some people feel that's over some pretty petty stuff, and they just need to give it up, and they just need to forgive, and they just need to move on, and it's really not that big a deal. And I'm also talking to people that it is a big deal. And whatever happened was really harmful and really hurt. And it's not as easy to forgive. And it's just not as easy as listening to a message and doing it. And so my prayer is for both of those groups. My prayer is for people that just know it's just something they're dealing with, and they just need to trust God. They need to trust you and let it go. I pray you help them to do that. And if it's somebody that's wrestling with some really serious wrongs, I pray you help them to have the courage to maybe make a phone call and help process that with somebody that'll help them deal with those feelings and try to heal from that. Whether that be a counselor or a pastor or whoever, I pray that you help them, give them the courage to do that, Father. And give all of us the courage to trust you. When you're trying to tell us what's best for us, we're stubborn. And it's hard for us to accept those truths. And we also know that it hurts sometimes to follow through with the things you tell us to do. Turning the other cheek is not an easy thing to do, God. So help us to remember what you've done for us so that we may be able to do the same thing for others. And it's in your Son's name I pray.